Hello, welcome back to Databases Made Easy. Yes, I've had a haircut since the last video, but don't worry, we are just continuing on in our same sequence of videos. Okay. In this video, what we're going to talk about are three things or three objects that a lot of people might think are the same thing. Okay, but they're actually very different. The reason I say people might think they're the same thing is because if you really go to a SQL Server database that you don't really know much about, and you go select star from table name, there's a good chance that when you look at the results in the results group, that they'll be sorted by the identity column, and this could give you the idea that it's actually the clustered index and also the primary key and so forth. But they're actually very different. But a lot of people, including what we're going to do in a sec, will create the primary key to be the clustered index and also the identity. Okay, so you look at a table and those three things are the same thing, but they can often be split out. Okay, so to begin, we'll go over to SQL Server and we'll just bring up our script that we've been working on, and we'll just recreate the customers table because that's the smallest one with each of these different objects. Okay, and then as we go through the next few videos, we might change it up and look at different fields being the primary key and being the clustered index as our data gets larger, and then you'll be able to see the difference. Okay, but to begin with, let's keep it nice and simple. I want you to hover over the create customers table and execute. Okay, so now here I refresh our table list. There's our customers table. So in the previous video, as I said before, we added our identity column on the customer ID. We said the customer name cannot be null, and we have a default on the create timestamp. Okay, now instead of using the GUI this time as well, I want you to right click on customers, go script table, insert into new query edit window. Okay, so this just kind of saves us typing. Okay, we can say insert into customers, and there's our field placeholders and our value placeholders. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move these up so it's a little bit easier to read for the sake of the demo. Okay. So our field names and our placeholders for the values. Now remember the create timestamp is defaulted, so we can get rid of that. Okay, just leaving our customer name. All right. So to insert a string value or here, what I'm going to do is single quotes, and I'm just going to put in the name Fred Smith, like that. Okay. So now if we just highlight and run that, one row affected, and then I'm going to come here and go select star from customers, highlight and run that, and there's our row. We've got our identity field, our customer name, which we typed up there, and our create timestamp, okay, which is today's date and time. Now I'm just going to again copy that, paste that, and this time I'm going to put in a second customer name. We're going to put in Mary Jones. Run that, and same thing. And there we go, our customer ID, our customer name, and our create timestamp. Now, this is a silly example, okay, because let's assume that for this database, the customer name has to be unique. Now, obviously in the real world, there's going to be more than one Fred Smith and more than Mary Jones. So it doesn't make sense, but I want you to imagine it for this demonstration. So because there can only be one Fred Smith in this database, if someone was to come in and add a second Fred Smith, that shouldn't be allowed. So let's come in here. We've got our Fred Smith typed. I'm going to refresh, and it worked. And then we look at customers. We can see here that we've got now two Fred Smiths. And like I said before, I do customer ID as the identity. So there's 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, there's different ways to enforce uniqueness. Okay. Two obvious ones, the primary key and a unique constraint. Okay. In this video, we're just going to look about the primary key. The main difference between a primary key and a unique constraint is that a primary key cannot have null. Okay, a unique constraint can have one value of null. So let's come over here. Here's our customers table. Obviously, we have to drop it before we can recreate it. Okay. So because as I said before, a primary key cannot be null, we're going to remove the not null. Okay, and instead we're going to type primary key. Okay, and I'm going to recreate that table here. All right. Now when we come back, I'm going to insert these two customers like that, Fred Smith and Mary Jones, and then I'm going to come back here and type Fred Smith, or highlight Fred Smith, and try and add Fred again, and there we go. There's our error. A violation of primary key constraint. Okay, the duplicate key value is Fred Smith. So it did not allow us to add in a second Fred Smith. So a more realistic as well as example of a primary key would be maybe a customer code, a reference ID that's not an identity, maybe like a value that when you go to a shop and you give them a code to relate to you. A lot of companies will have an abbreviation or something like that, and that has to be unique. And so you can put in a primary key to keep that unique. Okay, so that's an example of a primary key. The other thing I said before is a clustered index. Now, I'm probably going to talk more about clustered and non-clustered indexes later on. We do bigger selects and we have tables with more data. Okay, so it's easier to see the difference. But again, because we're kind of working on our script to create our database, it makes sense to put the clustered index in here now. We can put the clustered index on pretty much any field or fields that we want, provided that the data types are fine. What we're going to do is on this particular table, we're going to put the clustered index on the customer name. Okay, just so when we sort it later on, you can see that the customer name is what it's sorted on the clustered index. But so we're going to talk about that a bit more. So later on, the way we type it with a script, we just type the words clustered index after it. Okay, like that. Primary key clustered index. Why is that clustered index? Primary key. Oh, so it's just clustered. Sorry. My mistake. You don't need the index when you're creating it on the table. When you create it on its own script, you'd have to type create index or create clustered index. So here, primary key clustered will create the primary key clustered index at the same time as creating the table. You do need to drop it in this case because we're creating the table here like that. So now we come here, we insert, and we go customers. There we go. We've got now our table with a primary key and a clustered index. The reason we want to have a clustered index on a table is because if you don't, it's going to be called a heap table. Again, this will be more outside the scope of this course, is to have heap tables versus clustered tables. If you feel free, go Google the difference or why you shouldn't have heap tables in your database. But apart from that, what we're going to do is, for the sake of this demo again, I'm going to just put the primary key and the clustered index on the identity fields. Okay, like this. Okay, keeps it nice and simple. And like I said before, as we go along with our database, we'll chop and change these primary keys and these clustered indexes to make a bit more sense. Okay, but to begin with, there's a brief overview, and I'll see you in the next video.